Let's be brutally honest right now. That's a big question.
I'm looking for someone who doesn't want to go to base camp, but they want to go to the very top.
Whether it's here, India, New York.
Civilization was born at happy hour.
That's what wins. That's what stands out. That's what people are interested in.
That's what I want to know.
The Hospopreneurs Podcast with James Henderson. Hello and welcome to the Hospopreneurs Podcast. You'd be hard-pressed to find a bartender that doesn't know my guest today. Imbibe Magazine has even called him the most famous cocktail bartender in the world. You're going to hear him humbly deflect it to Joe Baum. But Dale DeGroff is credited with transforming cocktail culture while working at the Rainbow Room in New York in the 1980s. He popularized a number of things, including the use of fresh juice and garnishes, the Cosmopolitan as we know it today, and even named the Nick and Nora glass. If you don't know what this glass is, Google it. If you drink alcohol, you've probably had a number of beverages out of this particular glass, and Dale named it. Dale has received numerous awards, trained many of today's greats, and authored best-selling cocktail books, including the first that I ever read, The Craft of the Cocktail. He's the founding president of the Museum of the American Cocktail, serves as a consultant for Holland America Line, and continues to entertain audiences with lively presentations on TV and stage worldwide. Hello and welcome to the show, Dale.
James, I'm delighted to be here.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the program. So thank you so much for sitting down with me today. You're a very well-known name in the industry and I'm excited to sit down and chat with you. So really appreciate your time. As you know, the first question that I like to ask on the program is a crazy hospitality story or exceptional hospitality experience. I like to see where guests want to go with this particular question. And I'd love to know what you've brought today.
Well, the hard part was trying to pick one. There's so many of them from the wonderful places that I worked, but two particularly wonderful places were the Rainbow Room and the Hotel Bel Air in Los Angeles, which was back in '78 when I joined staff in the top 10 hotels in the world. And it's stunning. It's a beautiful Japanese garden. And, Sly Stallone lives next door. And, up the road, across the street on the top of the hill is Red Buttons. And, it was a neighborhood bar for some in a special neighborhood, basically.
Wow.
And in fact, Harry Nielsen was at my bar daily. I don't know if you know Harry, but he was a 12 platinum albums guy, but you do know him because if you heard the song, Everybody's Talking at Me, Can't Hear a Word, that's Harry. Can't live if living it. That's Harry. I mean, he had so many songs that you would know, but he's a creature of the 70s, but in the 60s. But anyway, my particular story has to do with the piano player. While I was at the Hotel Bel Air, I went from day shift to night shift. And there was a piano player of 20 years then when I arrived who really owned the room at night. There was a big baby grand in the middle of the room. And when Bud came on, Bud Herman was his name. He was the man. He introduced people across that piano for years, and those stories are wonderful. And he became a dear, dear friend. As a matter of fact, when Bud died, is when I decided to leave the job because the room changed so much. And he was a friend, and I was a pallbearer, and as was Harry and Nielsen and his best buddy, Bud Thies, who was a rich oil man who used the hotel as a home when he was in town, which was a lot of the time because he had oil concerns in LA and up in Oklahoma where he was from. And the story is about the party after our trip to Forest Lawn to Ventura, Bud, and coming back to the Hotel Bel Air and drinking cases of Cristal champagne and caviar because his oil man buddy wanted to really send him off in style, As a matter of fact, my wife said she knew it was a Hollywood party when she went into the ladies' room. And the two mistresses and the wife were all crying on each other's shoulders. But Bud was a lovely man, don't get me wrong. He had played with Benny Goodman. He was at the Flamingo in the early days, 2 years after it opened. And he was in the lounge and Goodman was in the main room. And Goodman lost a piano player and he ended up traveling with him for 2 years. So he was an extraordinary guy and a wonderful, wonderful host. So it was a great loss. So here we are. We've been drinking champagne for hours, and I'm with Harry and his wife, Una, and my wife, Jill, and the steward of the hotel, who was my son's godfather, who had moved up to San Francisco, an Italian guy named Paul Camardo. Paul was a delightful guy. We all decided to sneak into the lounge before everybody got the idea, because we knew that it would be fun to sit there and just pay tribute to Buddy in the place where he worked, So we went in and we got Harry's favorite table, a banquet similar to this, had a phone on the table, and it was right next to the bar. got a bottle of champagne, and then the place filled up like that. There's two old guys, Larry and Richard were the waiters, right? And Paul was wall-eyed, and he was pouring the champagne at our table. And I'm talking to Harry and Una, and I'm looking down at the champagne all over the table because Paul couldn't see the glasses, and he was. And I grabbed the bottle. I said, "Geez, Paul, you should have asked me to pour it." And he said, "Oh, sorry, man," and it was. So now we needed a bottle of champagne, but these guys, they were just totally brave. Well, anyway, Harry picks up the phone in the meantime, and he calls the desk, and he asks for a number in London. So we're talking, and then we hear, "No, wake him up. It's okay. You tell him it's Harry. No, tell him it's an emergency. Yes. No, it's okay to wake him up. Ringo, it's Harry. Look, Bud died, and we're in the bar. They got flowers all over the baby grand, and it's a sad occasion, but it's a happy occasion because we're all together in the place where we worked and partying, And we wish you were here. You probably would have been a pallbearer if you were. Ringo had a house in Bel Air also, so he was there a lot. And then he said, "Oh, by the way, when we ring off, I'm going to send you back to the desk, and could you tell him to get another fucking bottle of champagne to my table because it's so busy in here. I can't get anybody's attention." And he hangs up, and not 3 minutes later, Larry shuffles up to there. He says, Mr. Nielsen, you're not going to believe what just happened." And he said, "What happened, Larry?" "Well, Ringo Starr just bought you a bottle of champagne."
Wow.
That was a pretty extraordinary moment.
Wow.
In my life at the Hotel Bel Air.
Wow.
I think we had to have a toast on that one.
I agree.
Here's the Harry who we lost, sadly. He was an extraordinary guy. I remember Harry, now the bar was interesting because it had windows over here, and then this winding paths went around the bar over to where the restaurant was, and there's all bougainvillea with those paths, He saw a newly married couple all dressed up going to their room, and he said, "Get me a bottle of champagne now." And he said, "I want you to take these two glasses. I want you to go out the other door and meet them in the path." Bottle of Dom Perignon.
Yeah.
Right? So Larry runs over there, and he was waiting for them with two glasses and a bottle of Dom Perignon. That's the kind of guy Harry is.
Amazing. Sounds like a really nice guy.
He was incredible. We had a lot of fun.
Thank you for sharing that story, Dal. Really appreciate it. And I can see you enjoyed sharing it too.
My God. I get so many more from that place. It was just a spectacular place story. I had a serendipitous career. I ended up working for Joe Baum after that, But even in my first real serious job in the business, it was in Rockefeller Center at a glorified Irish sort of bar. I mean, they had an Irish character named Charlie O, imaginary host. And it was an Irish bar, but it was a very high-end Irish bar with Rockefeller Center. And it was a Joe Baum Irish bar.
Right.
And he had done it upright. His advertising guys, who had been doing his advertising for some years, worked on an amazing theme. There were pictures, hospitality and food and drink related all around, black and white, most of them. And all of them had captions. I mean, things like, Oscar Levant, who was a professional business show, and his caption was, "I don't drink. I don't like it. It makes me feel good." And then you go around the corner, there's George G. Nathan, who was a drama critic and particularly sour puss. His caption was, "I only drink to make other people interesting." And then there was Harpo, and it was just aligned with an exclamation point. So it was really, people would actually take tours through the dining room to read and to see these wonderful captions. Well, that was my first big job in the business. I had the good fortune of working next to Pat and Mike. I have to tell you, these two guys understood hospitality. They understood how to run a bar. I mean, they kept that bar full. And it was an interesting bar. It was filled with advertising people, business people, gangsters. It was just a great crowd, And at lunchtime, we had a Eamon over there at a steam table with always a whole turkey, a whole ham, and a whole roast beef, all the fixins, sour, and they had something called souse shrimp, this big thing with a giant shrimp, the cold, but with all the onions and stuff and in a brine, it was just amazing. People would just eat from that bar at the tables, and they had standing round tables in the middle of the bar, and it was a wonderful, wonderful bar. I ended up getting the service window there before I went west. And I got the weekends, I got the bar. So it was my first serious, interesting, unbelievable job. And the fact that I could watch Pat and Mike handling these customers was just, Mike seemed so gentle until someone misbehaved at the bar or said something or said the word fuck or something like that, because Michael wouldn't stand for that. So we don't, language, we don't accept that here at Charlie O's, Or if somebody says something like, this son of a bitch we have for president. No. We don't speak ill of our politicians here at Charlie O's, I don't care what Democrat, Republican. He wouldn't stand for it, right? I mean, he was an immigrant. He came over,
Yeah.
and a proud American, but never had to raise his voice. I mean, people loved him so much that if anybody ever, turned on Mike, it would be like that science fiction movie where when everybody turned into an alien, the one who wasn't, all the aliens looked at them, right? If anybody ever treated Mike badly, all the rest of the customers are right there, What's your problem, pal? But to see him work and then down at the other end was Mike. At the other end was Pat. Pat ran the football pool, and he was like a little more rotund. And if Mike was the good cop, he was the bad cop, sort of, but he wasn't bad. I mean, he was just, he handled the sports guys, the gangsters, all that kind of
You
crowd.
need that guy. Yeah.
He was wonderful in his own way, but to watch this, I remember I started as a waiter in this place. So it was a great job. He made so much money. The only problem was there were these long cement stairs that went 2 flights down to where the kitchen was. And we would carry up big oval trays with 6, 8, 10, 12 dinners on them. I mean, at least once a day you heard this bang, 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 as all the dishes and all the tops went down. But it was good money. And I remember my big break was the afternoon manager after the lunch. He said, okay, who tends bar? And all the waiters are shutting down their stations and everything. Who tends bar? Anybody tend bar in here? And I went, I do. And she said, okay, I want to see you on the loading dock in about 40 minutes. Ready to go, tie, wear what you're wearing now, your uniform. So I go up to Mike at the bar and I say, Jesus, Mike, you got to write down like the 10 most popular drinks on this index card for me because I'm going up to the mayor's residence, and Mayor Beam in those days, up at the Gracie Mansion. And he said, Dale, don't worry about it. You're not going to need any drinks. It's going to be not that kind of a bar. I said, Mike, please, just in case, I don't want to really mess up, It's, all right, Dale, that's good for you. And of course, when I get up there, the occasion of the party, by the way, my first big party as a bartender. And of course, it's a tabletop bar. Mike says to me, Dale, you're going to serve Chardonnay, vodka rocks, Scotch rocks, Perrier, and Tab. That's it. And he was to the letter. He was direct, right?
Perfect.
And of course, these guys didn't want the gig because you have to load a truck, unload it again, and unload it again,
Pain
right?
in the ass,
And these are union guys. They don't have to do that kind of crap.
Yeah.
So it was just...
They're just like, yes, sir.
And the occasion is Mayor Beam giving the keys of the city to Rupert Murdoch, who had just bought the New York Post.
Wow.
Now that's interesting because fast forward, that was, oh my God, 76, I want to say, whenever Murdoch bought the Post. I don't remember, but that was the occasion sometime around then. Fast forward to 86, 96, 06 maybe, when Rupert had his new young Japanese wife. I can't remember her name now, Cho, I think it was. And she was throwing, and now I'm the Rainbow Room guy. I'm the big famous Rainbow Room guy, right? So a friend of mine in the industry calls me up and says, hey, Dale, I got a great party for you if you want it. And now, the Rainbow Room's closed and we lost windows in the world. You know that story. We operated both of those, by the way. He said, I got Rupert Murdoch down on Prince Street at his duplex loft, and his girlfriend, his new wife is throwing him a 70th birthday party, and I need somebody to create drinks after his ranch in Australia, and just interesting stuff because I hear they're a pretty good drinker, So I said, hey, I'm in, man. Money's good, I see. And so I set the bar up. I got all these drinks ready to go, and nobody's drinking. And finally, he comes over to the bar. He says, so hot shit cocktail guy. I said, actually, Mr.
That's
Murdoch,
pretty good accent too, actually, by the way.
I said, actually, Mr. Murdoch, our fortunes have risen together in this town because my first real day as a bartender was at Gracie Mansion when you presented the keys of the city. Ian giving him the keys of the city, right?
Yeah. Wow.
He said, don't worry about the mates. They'll be back after dinner. I said, then nobody's drinking, And he said, they'll be back after dinner. And sure enough, what's his son's name? Lackham, so whatever. I can't remember his name now. He was a kid then. He wasn't an adult yet. He was like a teenager.
Oh, Lachlan.
He came up to the bar afterwards and said, Dad wants shooters. I said, yeah, right. Well, like 15 minutes later, he goes, hello, Dad wants shooters. I said, you were serious? Rupert Murdoch wants shooters? He said, yeah, and keep them coming. So for the rest of the night, the drinks that I had made for his ranch and the other, I just shook them up and poured them out in shot glasses because they were dancing. They were all over the place, right? And trays of trays and trays until 4:35 in the morning. Oh my God, they were absolutely wasted.
They must have been hammered by the end of the night. Goodness.
The entertainment at the party, who was a great piano player, it was his daughter. And they did the album together after he passed, The Magic of Technology. I'm not going to remember his name, sadly. Wonderful, wonderful talented woman, was the surprise for Rupert from his new wife. But it was an extraordinary experience, the kind of experience you get when you're in this business and no other business. I mean, I remember a maitre d', well, we called him the mayor of Broadway because he eventually took over our cabaret, but he was the maitre d' at the Rainbow Room for a while. And he said to me, Bismarck Irving was his name. He was a very tall and regal black man. And he said, Dale, this job kills me. Captains of industry grovel in front of me up there at that maitre d' stand for a table.
It's so true. It's so true, right? Goodness. Have you ever been in that? Because I know that your path into...
I had to parse that, a lot at behind the bar because my regulars would call me up on a Saturday night at 10 and say, look, I got to get in at 11. I'm like, are you crazy? And I would call Bismarck and say, Bismarck, 11 for 5? What, are you crazy?
Yeah.
When they get here, call me back, So when they got there, I called him back and he says, okay, this is what you do now. And I mean now. You take them past the line, go in the side door through the kitchen area where the service bar is and come out behind the bandstand and meet me there. Because I don't want anybody to see these people walking through that Rainbow Room, And that's how they got their table. And then years later, this guy was a liquor sales guy who did the big hotels. And we did a lot of business with him. Years later, we're having a drink together and with other people. And he starts telling the story of that night. This is, and there we were walking right past John Kennedy into the kitchen. I never saw John Kennedy. John Kennedy was online waiting to get in.
Yeah.
And he was so excited about the fact that he went,
wow.
That's what it's like, this business. You know what I mean?
The perks, right? Amazing. Oh, thank you. Such incredible stories. Let's go back even further. You'd be hard pressed to find anyone who hasn't heard of Dale DeGroff in the bar world. For those who haven't, who've just tuned into this episode, they've heard a couple of crazy stories from you. Tell us more about what it is that is you, that's Dale.
Well, I went to New York to be an actor. I was at the University of Rhode Island, and we entered a one-act, two-person play, at that time a new playwright who happened to have had a play on Broadway at the same time, to the Yale Drama Festival. They would get regional schools to come to the festival. You submit your play, and they'll decide whether they think it's worthy of their festival. So we brought our little play to the Yale Drama Festival, and some of the New York critics in the summertime, they would go to the regional theaters and stuff like that. But usually Brendan Gill, who was like the 80-year-old drama critic for the New Yorker, always liked to go to the Yale Drama Festival because he said new talent and stuff like that. And he also was interested in the playwright that we were doing, Lanford Wilson. It's a very particularly dark play. And he made a single paragraph. It wasn't even in the New Yorker. It was in a regional mention in the New York Times about, Yale Drama Festival. Most interesting thing was a young group from the University of Rhode Island putting on a Lanford Wilson play. Most interesting thing at the festival. I went back to the university, packed my bags, my junior year on the dean's list, and never looked back.
Wow.
Got to New York, checked into the Stonehouse YMCA, figuring I was going to be on the Broadway boards in no time, baby.
Mm-hmm.
After a month in the YMCA where you couldn't leave anything in your room, so I had to put it all in lockers over at Penn Station when I went to work, and then put it all back. I wanted
Goodness. It wasn't so fun to stay at the YMCA.
Yeah, no. It was a Sloan House. They said, it was funny when you check in, the guy goes, oh, by the way, don't leave anything in your room when you go out. I said, but I want to be living there. So yeah, I know, but don't leave it in your room that you value.
Wow.
And I go, what do you think I should do with it? And he said, well, they got lockers over at Penn Station. Put them there.
You packed it up every day?
Every day. All I had was a backpack and a guitar, to be truthful. I didn't have a lot of stuff.
And are you a nylon or a steel string
Well,
guitar?
at that time, it was an acoustic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I play guitar too.
No kidding. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you a story about that.
Please.
So I had a line on an apartment. It was a big deal.
Yeah.
And it was a woman who was a friend of a friend. She had an apartment in the Village, dream come true. Her name was Ruth. And she called me up and said, look, I work on 69th Street at a place called whatever. And but there's a little Irish bar called Paddy McGlade's on the corner. You don't come into my place because the boss doesn't want people hanging around waiting for me, especially if people don't have any money. Go to the Irish bar. Beers are only 50 cents. I'll meet you there maybe at midnight. But if it's really busy, I may not get there till 2 or even later. So I roll in there about 11 with my guitar and my backpack.
Is it?
And I walk in the front door of this little neighborhood Irish bar on the corner, and all eyes are on me when I walk through the door with my long hair, my guitar, and my backpack, And they looked at me like a side dish they hadn't ordered, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I sit at the bar, but the only nice person was the big guy behind the bar who turned out to be Austrian. His name, he was 70 at that point in his life. They greeted me as a young man. Like I said, I'll have a beer. His name was Al, and he was really nice, So I figured now I got about $3 in my pocket. 50-cent beer, I figure I got to give Alan, I got to give him $1. So time's going by and I'm nursing this beer, but I got to order another one. So now I'm up to $2. I got $1 left, I'm hoping she'll come in. And she doesn't come in at midnight. And then the guy next to me, the old guy next to me says, "Hey kid, you play that guitar?" I said, "Yeah." "You going to sing us something or what?" And now there was a guy in the corner over there. I found out later on it was Paddy McGlade. He's like angry at this regular, but Al, Irish neighborhood bars were a different thing than other places. The bartender was really the boss. Al was fine with it. So if Al was fine with it, Paddy wasn't going to interfere. So I played "You're Cheating Heart" by Hank Williams, right? He's got a tear rolling down his cheek and he goes, "Give the kid a beer, Al." And I'm like,
That's nice. Another 57
she
beer.
didn't show up. She shows up finally at like 2:30, 2:45. Meanwhile, I've played the same song 2 more times, 2 more beers. She comes in and she says, "My boyfriend's moving in. I'm sorry. He just called me tonight. We made the decision." Mike,
Oh, no. Oh, that's rough.
Anyway, to tell you the truth, if you have any knowledge of New York City, and I had very little at the time, but I did realize something within 30 seconds of being in town. Well, I had also come into town on weekends before with my buddy because his brother was a big-time advertising guy. And that's how I ended up meeting my mentor. He actually did the advertising for Joe Baum, Restaurant Associates, which is a huge company now. And so I knew a little bit about but when you make that big step and you're not going home again, it's a much different place. It's much scarier. And,
maybe you've been asked this before, I hope that it's interesting to at least reflect on, but how much of it do you think is skill and versus luck? You're obviously a very skilled bartender. And
well, it took me 30 seconds to realize that life takes place in the New York City bars. Apartments are too small. You go to your neighborhood bar and that's your extended family. I mean, we're living in boxes in New York City because it was so damn expensive, And if you're my age, you got 2 roommates or 1 at least. And so I found out that was the most interesting place to be. Whether it was a neighborhood bar or a fancy cocktail lounge downtown where Ron would take us because we couldn't afford them, Once in a while, he'd call us up and say, "Come on, I'm buying you steaks at Charlie O's. Get your ass down here, And we'd go down there and have a steak. I fell in love with the New York City Bar and Grill. I mean, it's where I wanted to be. Somebody once said to me, seems like, as an actor, why didn't you go try to find a job in a Broadway theater as an usher or something? And I said, I guess you're right about that. I found a job in bars because I friggin' loved the bars.
Yeah. Working in bars is so exciting.
To me, it was, and I couldn't wait to become the bartender. I went to LA, still trying to be an actor. After I left Charlie O's.
You say that was still your focus.
This is 78. I was still trying to be an actor.
It sounds like it was something that you thought you wanted, but it wasn't actually something that you'd jumped in head first to do. Yeah.
Well, I get to LA and I'm getting some work. I'm doing voiceovers for the Hulk, making money. And I luck into this. Well, somebody called me up with some intel. They said they just fired the day guy at the Hotel Bel Air. And if I were you, I'd get in your car now. It's one of the best jobs in town. Get your ass out there. And I went out and I walked in and there's this big, tall guy behind the bar, Jim Kitchens, and he looked like a substitute teacher because that's exactly what he was. He was the executive bartender. He did not want to be behind the bar. And he was almost, I could see in his eyes, he was almost going to say, checking at the office, and he didn't. He said, "Where did you work?" I said, "Charlie O's in New York City." Now, Charlie O's was a pretty famous place because it was a Joe Baum. Joe Baum was a legendary figure in the restaurant business in New York. He had heard of it. I found out years later, by the way, that he checked my references. He called up Mike. And Mike said, "You couldn't get it better, man, I didn't find that out till I interviewed Mike for an article. I did some writing, and I called Mike at home when he was retired in his mid-80s and told him what a great job the Bel Air was. He says, "I know." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, the guy called me up, And I said, "He did? He called you?" I had no idea that he had called Mike. That's when I found out that he gave me
years later.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was wild. But anyway, the piano player, Bud, I told you about before, came up to the bar one night and said to me this, just offhandedly. He would come up at the end of the night and finish his people would line the shots up on the piano that wanted to buy him a 7-star Metaxa. That's what he drank was soda. So he brought his shot up and I poured him a soda. And he said, Dale, I know you're really into the acting thing, but pretty good at this bartending stuff. That's all he said. Boy, the worm got in my ear. And by then I'm married. I got one child and one on the way. And I was going to go up to San Francisco because Paul, the former steward at the hotel, was opening a restaurant up there. He was working for Alice Waters at Chez Panisse in the meantime, learning his trade. By the way, he was a postgraduate in philosophy at Harvard. Mm-hmm. All he wanted to do was make pizza. Right? And they were looking for a place in Emeryville, California, Berkeley, that area. And I said, Paul, I want to run the bar. But then I went up there and I couldn't find a job in a hotel that had medical insurance because those jobs are hard to get up there. Somebody had to die, for you to get a job like that.
I wonder, because this is for a lot of people in the industry, they decide that they want to be in hospitality because usually people stumble on it in some way and then go, actually, I have a love of this and I want to stay here. I wonder with people such as myself, such as this person you described, who are interested in these things that you're just not going to be able to discuss running a pizza restaurant or doing these things. How do you exercise that muscle outside of the work that you do? Like your music, for example. How do you exercise that interest of yours?
Well, I sang in bars. I had piano player friends. When I was in a position to hire them, then I could be sure to be able to sing there.
Yeah.
But I did sing at bars. I became, there's a lot of open mics in New York City.
On the day off, just go to an open mic.
Yeah, for sure. And as far as the business itself, when I met Joe, it changed my life completely. I mean, I was good at bartending because I was a good-natured sap. I was never afraid to say to somebody, by the way, haven't made that in a long time. How do you make it? Right? I was never embarrassed by that. I was embarrassed a few times in my early career by not knowing stuff, but I was never afraid to ask, and I really, really was a sponge. I wanted to learn a lot. When I got to the Hotel Bel Air, by the way, I didn't know what half of that stuff was behind that bar because I had never worked in a bar that had 7 or 8 kinds of port and Armagnacs of all sorts and ports of all sorts. But I tasted my way through the whole back bar as I was polishing those bottles as required in the day shift.
We've all been there. Anyone in service has been there, yeah.
And so I educated myself. There was no internet. You were on your own. And a lot of the information you got from the older bartenders was, wrong. I'm not saying bars weren't great. They were great. They were fun. These bars had these bartenders, if they didn't have the knowledge, they certainly, that deep knowledge anyway. And by the way, those cocktails and everything were gone. We revived that stuff. That stuff had been gone since Prohibition. There was no skilled labor after Prohibition, and they didn't open a bunch of bar schools because nobody wanted to be a bartender. Why? Because it was a gangster profession. It took 2 generations for that stain to be removed from the hospitality profession as far as bars and alcoholic beverages go, because the gangsters not only owned the bar, they made the booze, they shipped it. This whole 3-tier system of producer, distributor, that whole thing started because the gangsters didn't want to be cut out of the action when everything went a bit legit. And so the gangsters started these distribution companies, Charmer and all that stuff. And that generation, until that generation died out, it was a very unsavory profession. No parent and a career-minded young person is not going to look at that as a way of advancement in their life. And I think if I did anything at the Rainbow Room, working with Joe and putting those old drinks back on the menu. And then, because I'm in 30 Rock, I end up going on the Today Show, and stuff like that in the morning, making drinks. And suddenly bartenders are seeing this bartender on TV. What the hell is that all about? Basically what I'm getting at is more than anything I did in my career, I made it okay to be a bartender as a career choice.
That's key for a lot of people. That shift has changed dramatically in the last,
my God.
Right? What I want to ask you is, what have you implemented to manage that balance between service and the other things that you do outside of your bar work? I know that that's taken over, but
it was hard to do. I will tell you that with having 2 children and a very understanding wife who's an artist, by the way, I'm lucky to be with her 44 years now because it's a very difficult profession on the family. And that was hard. That was the hardest thing I had to do. And I say that to young bartenders all the time. It's the hardest thing you're going to come up against. If you want to have a family, you got to think twice about this, and you got to talk to your mate because it's going to change your lives, and not such a good way. You're not going to be home for dinner, ever. You're not going to be there for homework, ever, unless you can get a day job. You're lucky. And, as a young person, It's something to think about.
What I find here is a lot of people want to, maybe it's the same in the US, please tell me if it's different, but a lot of people, I know with tipping culture, it's you can actually earn considerable amounts of money.
But you still don't have health insurance usually. It's only a union job where you get the health insurance. And if you're having a family, you need that kind of job. I always got lucky and had it.
What I wanted to spell out is in Australia, I've found a lot of people kind of feel like they cap out as a head bartender somewhere and then go, okay, the only real step from here is to own a venue, or they leave.
Well, something changed. Something changed in the new millennium. First of all, premium products started to proliferate, premium spirit products. That changed the industry. And everybody wanted to know, is the cocktail really back? That's the question I got all the time in the 90s. Is the cocktail really back? Is the cocktail really back? I'd say, take a look at the Libby glass catalog. When I got in this business, there were like 2 choices for the martini glass. There's 120 now. What do you think that means? And then the trade, because they were putting so much money into these quality spirits, they wanted to kind of double down on their investment. So they started, instead of putting all their money into print ads, which is what they did in those days, because television was just becoming, cable was just becoming a possibility, but still remote. They started putting money into the trade. People like Grey Goose, these guys, people like Pernod Ricard, Diageo. These are companies that were put together, fashioned together when Seagrams broke up. But they started saying, we need to educate the trade to our products. We need to educate the consumers to our products. So the advertorial was invented. Paul Packalt writing one advertorial after another for the New York Times. These are full-page primers on how malt scotch is made, full-page primers on how American bourbon is made. I'm sure Grey Goose did one. They chose the best distillers in the world, cognac, and they have the best water and all that stuff. These are teaching customers about this stuff. So I would go to my bartenders at the Rain Room and say, guys, we need to know at least as much as the customers do. I mean, what are you going to say when someone walks in and says, if you got a real smoky Isla whiskey, are you going to know what they're talking about? Are you going to understand when you get these questions? You better be as smart as your customers. And so education became something that was, I don't ever remember as a young bartender all through the 70s into the 80s, ever having anybody teach me anything about anything. You were on your own. And if you were determined, you could get somewhat of an education by reading books that were out there and stuff like that, hard to find. But it became easier and easier as the internet came along. That opened up the world. As the first chat rooms, there was one called Drink Boy that was an experiment by a Microsoft executive named Robert Hess, who had an avocation of cocktails. And so he creates this Drink Boy, and all of a sudden there's conversations going on around the world among bartenders in this sort of Microsoft experiment, These threads would go on for 4 weeks about whether it's a half ounce or 3/4 of an ounce in this particular cocktail, and it was fascinating what was going down. So that kind of community never existed for me as a young bartender. When you worked in an Irish bar and there were 2 registers, you might get called into the boss's office on a Saturday night or on a Sunday morning, and he'd say, or Monday morning, he'd say, look, I'm looking over the figures for Saturday night. Joe rang up 2,500. You rang 1,500. A couple more weekends like that, and I might be looking for a new bartender. So he's pitting you against that guy down there. So not only was there no community, there was competitive. And the only community was that you would go to your mate's bar, you'd throw a 20 on the bar, and you'd drink free all night. Or he'd come to your bar and do the same thing. That was community then. But now we have Speed Rack. Mm-hmm. We have Crowd Rise to get a heart for the head bartender at Zigzag, because he has health insurance. We have the most amazing things happening that I've ever seen. That kind of community that's happening in the hospitality industry, especially in the beverage side, really never existed before. And it's huge now. It's a really big thing. And, we were talking about responsible drinking. Suddenly, it's become a lot more than just responsible drinking. How do you treat your employees? People are asking these questions. Now, how should the boss be treating me? Maybe, to young guys, I said, if the person you're working for doesn't share your vision of this business, fire your boss. I know that's hard for you to take because jobs don't always come that easy, but why would you waste your life working for somebody that doesn't even understand what you want to do? It's not treating you the way you should be treated. But I remember having the good luck of drinking on the town in New York with Ron Holland, who was one of the partners in Lois Holland Calloway for Restaurant Associate, was a big Plum account. Why? Because they could entertain all their other clients at the best restaurants in the city at the time, which Joe had created. And I remember Ron teaching me, not overtly, but just by viewing the way he handled the bartender, what he ordered and when and why, what wines they drank at dinner when we were out dinner with him, why they always ended the evening with a stinger and started it with a martini. I remember teaching myself how to like martinis again. We're doing this martini bar here. I didn't even like martinis when I got to New York because I had gotten sick as a youngster. I had to teach myself not only how to make them, but how to enjoy them so I could understand what the customer who loved this ceremony behind this drink, what it was all about. Now we have things like this, Le Martini, the Grey Goose Martini Bar. I love it. That kind of stuff never existed either. And nobody ever called brands back in those days. They didn't because you had your regular brands. There was a few premiums, but there wasn't any Grey Goose. There wasn't any Absolute. It was a Well and Smirnoff. And the Well was made probably by the Smirnoff company and put it in different bottles, or whatever. And that didn't exist. There were two malt scotches when I started in the business, Glenfiddich and Glenlivet. And once in a while you'd see Lefroy. Lefroy goes all the way back to Jerry Thomas. They found it. David Wondrich, our historical oracle, the wonderful author of Imbibe and Punch, he found in the archives what the cellar of Jerry Thomas looked like. And in Jerry Thomas's cellar, when he wrote his book in 1862, was Lefroy Scotch. So Lefroy was an early arrival in New York City.
Wow.
Anyway, yeah, isn't that bizarre?
That is very cool.
Yeah. But anyway, what I'm saying is it was such a different place. When I wrote my first book, Craft of the Cocktail, in 2002, I did not brand those cocktails. If you branded a book, especially if you use the same brands over and over, say, you sold out to this company, didn't you? And you put your, and
That's what other bartenders will think, right?
Yeah. But when I did that same book again in 2020, the new edition of it, I branded every single drink. Why? Because now I could choose the vodka that I wanted in this particular drink. I could choose the gin that I wanted for that particular. There are so many different kinds and styles of, and finally the federal government, the TTB, has just understood that vodka is not tasteless and odorless. They have changed it used to say that it should be tasteless and odorless and blah, blah, blah. They took that wording out. It's no longer there because they know vodkas are not tasteless and odorless, and they never were. I traveled for 3 years tasting vodkas with groups of bartenders with Tony Abogani from Las Vegas, and believe me, they're not tasteless and odorless. The industry is so much different. The palette is so much larger. There are 7,000 gins worldwide now. Vodkas, God knows. I mean, vodka is still the second best selling. And I think the first best selling
in Australia, it's certainly, number one.
Yeah. Tequila has taken over in America, by the way.
Has it?
And,
wow.
and it knocked vodka down one notch.
Wow.
How about that?
My God. Dale, you mentioned the Craft of the Cocktail. Now, I've not told you this, but that was the first book that was gifted to me to learn about cocktails. And I'm so, so glad that the person that I learned from working in bars gifted me that book. So I definitely know the book well. So I appreciate you bringing it up as well. The first bar I worked at, I was a glassy, and my general manager was like, you're obviously interested in working in bars. This is a book that you should read. And he bought me this book, and that's how I came across your name. So it's nice to be able to sit down with you. So
the new edition, I should have brought one for you. I didn't think I'd know I was going to meet you.
It's okay.
I have to say it, the other edition, even though it was written in 2002, was really last millennium. You know what I'm saying? Can you imagine? Think about this for a minute. We are one of 10 groups of human beings in the last 10,000 years who have lived over a millennium. That's a big deal.
That is big.
And the changes that I've seen, I did tell you, I saw rock and roll come in and jazz go out. I saw so many changes on the culinary side of the business. And on the beverage side, those changes started coming with the new millennium. I used to say star chefs, that was the 90s. Star bartenders, that's the new millennium. And that's what happened. That's exactly what happened. They got educated and they realized that there are six figures salaries to be made as a bartender now, or as an expert in beverage, all aspects of it, not just the drinks, but how they're made and where the ingredients come from and how they're made. Coffee, tea, and that stuff, cider, beer. If you are that kind of a all-encompassing beverage expert, there are luxury corporations that own luxury properties around the world that need you, and they'll pay you middle six figures to have you, so that you can put together their hospitality programs, because you can't put the same hospitality program in Shanghai that you have in Paris or that you have in New York. You need to know what those people are drinking and why. We have Baijiu in America now, which is pretty amazing. Baijiu, by the way, the largest selling single spirit on the face of the earth.
Which is, it's just hard to think in a Western country. Like it's hard to see that, right?
Yes.
But I mean, you mentioned that and it makes me want to touch on a question that I thought of earlier that I'd like to move into, but it's impossible to predict what's going to happen. But what do you think is coming? What do you foresee as these movements? You mentioned about, star chefs, star bartenders, things like this movements or things that you see that are picking up a little bit of interest.
RTDs.
RTDs?
Because COVID did that. Everybody started canning their drinks in New York City. My friend Philip Duff, who made a Genever in Holland, fitted out a truck with a canning machine and went from bar to bar during COVID saying, I'll can your drinks for you if you want to sell them, because they could sell them at the front door. It was legal. They made it. A lot of laws were changed to allow people to survive, and they're changing them back, some of them now. But he would can people's drinks. He said, I'll come by once a week, man, and you got new drinks, we'll can them up and you can sell them to your customers at the front door because they couldn't go in.
That is very, very smart.
But that just a little tiny corner of what happened. All around the United States, people started this idea, bartenders who would have gone in that direction if it hadn't been for COVID. Now look, you go to an off-premise store now in the United States, you'll see a block of RTDs in the middle of the floor, 4 feet tall. The Paloma or a canned Paloma or a canned Negroni or whatever. This is over the top now, accidental in a way.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing interesting moves back in time. People are going back to 50s drinks, 60s drinks, the Grasshopper, the Golden Cadillac, but doing very premium luxury versions of them with new products that didn't exist back then. Tempest Fugit White Cacao, which is delicious. Creme de Cacao, are really premium made. A lot of the liqueurs of the 60s were basically artificial flavor, sugar and water, and alcohol. I hate to say it. But now people are making those same things the way they were originally made, from the actual things, from actual chocolate, from actual, not chemical
stuff.
Versions of those things,
Yeah.
And that changed. And so there were 1,500 spirits in America directly after Prohibition. And I said to you before, there are 7,000 gins. Think about that for a minute.
Wow.
That was another reason why the bartending profession never had a chance after Prohibition. There was a golden age of the cocktail from 1860 to right before Prohibition. But all those hundreds of brands and all those multiple brands of commercial bitter additives, all gone. Angostura survived, Peychaud survived. For a while, another one survived, but it was gone by the 60s. The products, the byproduct, forget the skilled labor, even having the ingredients for, when I opened the Rainbow Room and I looked at the old cocktails that Joe wanted, for the Rainbow Room. He wanted dishes with tradition. He wanted drinks with tradition. And I'm going back to Jerry Thomas and Harry Johnson, and these are not available, these things that are on this list of ingredients here. Slowly but surely, Ted Hay, Dr. Cocktail, and me, David Wonders, we all start putting pressure on the industry saying, there's a market for this. I tried to talk Angostura Bitters into doing an orange bitters. Well, I went to work for them, for a while. And I said, you guys have the oldest trademark in the beverage business. You should be making this and this and this. And they
changed their tune
now
on
they're
that.
making orange bitters, they're making cocoa bitters, So that to me is the future now. First of all, bartenders are taking much more into their hands than they ever did before. I tell bartenders to become deeply involved with the chef. And that never really existed before. That collaboration between, there should be a theme in these restaurants that carries over into the beverage program. And if the chef is smart, and you know what, the biggest culinary school in America, the Culinary School of America in Hyde Park and out in Napa Valley, don't even have a cocktail program, which blows my mind. Our 5-day master's class is being presented now for the last 3 years at the Hyde Park, but the students don't have access to it. That's crazy, because chefs, those guys are all going to end up, or a large percent of them are going to end up the new chefs, the new owners of the new generation out there. The biggest money-making outlet in their restaurant is going to be that bar, and they don't know anything about it. The return on the cost of sales at the bar is so microscopic compared to the cost of sales in the kitchen. Although that's changing too, because if you're making premium margaritas, if you're making a Grey Goose martini, the amount of Grey Goose that goes in there is costly. 2 ounces of Grey Goose is costly. It's not well anymore.
That education from industry to consumer is a challenging one too. And there's something, I don't know if you came across this overseas, but it certainly got a bit of circulation recently here about the cost of ice in cocktails. That's something that went around. But if consumers are educated on what the quality of these ingredients that are going into their drinks, not I'm moving away from ice, but more generally about ingredients in the drinks, that's a point to be made, right?
Exactly. When we were doing these martinis over here at the Grey Goose Bar, I'm watching her make these long strips of lemon peel, long like that. At the Rainbow Room, I used coins, which were about that big around, and they were yellow all the way around or orange all the way around, depending on the orange. And I cut them with a really sharp knife. And I got 12 to 15 of them out of a big orange or a big lemon. They get 5 of these.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know how much money they're spending to have that long strip? And not only that, I was explaining to Coco, when you take that long strip and you go, you're coating the top and everything with something that is extraordinarily acidic and bitter. And that coating of bitter orange oil, your first drink is going to be, that little spritz from a little coin is way more than you need even that. But when you take a huge strip and just coat everything with this orange oil, you're changing the flavor. And I think it's a really bad thing. They're doing it for aesthetics because it looks nice.
For people listening to the podcast,
this is what I was flaming into.
Dale's just pulled out the coin from the drink.
Yeah, this is what I'm flaming into my drinks. And that amount of oil creates a flash of, the flaming oil. The oil in the skin burns like any other oil. And look there's no white, just a little bit in the center. It's yellow all the way around, so you're not getting that bitter bits of the white. Audrey Saunders, by the way, is with me on this. Julie Reiner, famous bar owner in New York. They're both with me on this. That large peel is ruining the presentation of that first drink, that first taste.
What's your position on a wedge then? Well, obviously different drinks.
No, wedges
call
have
for
to be there
different
because
things.
you need the juice. A wedge is about juice. That's about changing the sweet and sour is what you're doing there. You're changing that. Tonic water is sweet. You squeeze that lime in there. It takes a little bit of the edge off the sweetness,
So Dale, I'll ask you then, Negroni, coin or wedge?
Oh no, slice a half wheel of orange. Absolutely, half wheel of orange. If you're making a Negroni properly in a big old double old-fashioned glass with, it's like the way they do it in Firenze, when you go to there's Luca Picchi, by the way, if you can get his book is finally translated to English. It's called, the English title is The Story of the Negroni or something, but they didn't keep the Italian title, which is in the Tratta del Conte, on the trail of the Count Negroni, who actually came to America, Canada, was a cowboy for a while, a gambler, and then went back, and he was a friend of Puccini. He's a really interesting guy, Count Negroni. And Luca did a major study on him. I had a Negroni at his place, and he serves it in a Mai Tai size glass, And I didn't understand when I first made Negronis at the Rainbow. I served them up. The warmer it got, the more bitter it got because there was no dilution, And already, this is 1987 when Americans really hadn't discovered bitter yet. And so that's why I took it off. As it warmed up, it got more and more bitter and nobody wanted them.
You live and you learn.
You live and you learn, yeah.
Dale, talk me through the revival of these old drinks because we've kind of jumped over long periods of time. We've kind of jumped over, right? And even then, you said you tested the Negroni, you served it up. It was bitter as it warmed up and people didn't enjoy it as much. And you took it off the menu and those sorts of iterations that took place. But over that evolution, you're known as someone who really kick-started a lot of those trends in the 80s in particular. So talk me through that part of your career.
Confession time first. It was Joe Baum, my mentor, who came to me in my first head bartending job at a small French fine dining restaurant called Aurora and said to me, okay, I want a 19th century beverage program. Go find a book called How to Mix Drinks by Jerry Thomas. It'll give you some insight to what I'm talking about. I want drinks with tradition, and I want the actual best recipes. I don't want any creativity. I want to bring the drinks back that have been gone from the American, this is America's heritage, and I want to see that happening at our place. And now I don't know anything about the Rainbow. I'm going to work for a small French fine dining restaurant with a 2-star Michelin chef, 3-star Gerard Pengo, and I'm kind of confused. Because we're selling the wines of Burgundy. We have a big copper bowl in the front of it. It's filled with champagne bottles. Anyway, but that's what he said when he hired me. And of course, I went to buy the book over on Fifth Avenue at Double Days and all these other places, and no one had ever heard of it, or him. Until I got to Scribner's, which was still open then, and walked in, and I described it, and the guy said, and it rings a bell. Let me go to the old and rare. And he brings the old rare catalog. Say, 1862, 1887, 1929, last edition. It ain't going to happen, pal. You're not going to find this book, I found. But that was Joe. He gave you a job. You either did it or you didn't. But when I found out why I was doing the job, when Benny Goodman sat at my bar one day at Aurora, and I went to Ray Wellington, a wine guy, one of the cellar rats from Windows on the World, trained by Kevin. I said, Kevin Girilli, that is. I said, what the hell's going on, Ray? We got Dale Chilhooly and all these famous designers, and now I got Benny Goodman. But what the hell's going on? What's Joe working on? He said, it's the Rainbow Room thing, man. You don't know about it? I said, no. What? The old supper club on top of the Rainbow Room. He's been working on it for a year now. Where have you been, And I'm like, well, actually 6 months, because we were only 6 months into Aurora at the time. And then it occurred to me, I'm a lab rat. I'm making a menu, not for this place. I'm making a menu for this beautiful supper club on top of Rockefeller Center. So I went to Joe. And I said, Joe, I get it. I wasn't thinking ahead. I see where you're going with all these drinks. And I said, I have an idea for the new menu at the Rainbow Room I've been thinking a lot about. I want to take drinks from the Store Club, the Copa, the Colony over at Fifth Avenue. We'll take, really iconic drinks from those places and we'll put a tribute menu together for those old. So I like it, put a menu together to make a show with me. So I got a little help from his partner, Michael Whiteman, helped me find a few books that I needed. And he also, Roseanne Gold was the chef for the mayor at the time, Mayor Koch at that point. And she came in and the two of them were eye tasters, and so I finally got the menu ready and then I had to present it to Joe, and that's how that evolved. It was really Joe's idea, not my idea. But once I got it, I embraced it, And I put together, I have it on my computer, I can't show it to you now, 26 drinks. Sazerac, Ramos Fizz, Colony, Between the Sheets, all these obscure, and the Martini and the Manhattan, but I took those off because they weren't obscure enough eventually, And, the Floridora, all these drinks. And when that long, beautiful Milton Glaser graphic menu went down on every single table and in front of every single bar guest, we sold from that menu. Old people who had missed those drinks, and remembered them. Young people who had never heard of them. I mean, it was a sensation. And first of all, Joe was a publicity magnet, because he had opened the Four Seasons in 1959, the Forum of the 12 Caesars before that, La Fonda del Sol in 1960. I mean, this man was so far out in front. On his menu at La Fonda del Sol, which was a celebration of the Americas, all of them, South American dishes, Central American, Mexican. On his menu were 5 tequila drinks, 2 mezcal drinks, a pisco sour, and a mojito criollo in 1960.
Wow.
He had to import pisco, mezcal, and tequila to the city for that menu.
Wow.
That's the menus that I found when I worked at the advertising agency as Gopher in the files, when I was going through the files.
That's something you'd see today. A trendy bar today.
Joe was way out front. It was his dream to do this stuff. He believed that there was a true American cuisine. And he was pissed off that 5-star and 4-star chefs were all French and Italian in New York City. And you know who else believed that? His menu consultant, James Beard, of the James Beard Awards, And James Beard was his consultant from the beginning until he died in 1985 on all of his restaurants. He believed that this, call it what you want, fusion, whatever, where, you have techniques. We're not going to get rid of the good techniques, but there is something in this country that we're missing. Maybe we get the regional and mix it all together, and that's what happened. That culinary revolution that I was talking about before, that's what happened. That's what created the audience for our craft cocktail movement in the new millennium, with these people willing to take chances on big flavor, in love with big flavor. I remember Cantonese as a kid. When the first Szechuan Hunan place opened at Broadway and 97th Street, we thought we had died and gone to heaven. What is this stuff? Unbelievable. Hunan Szechuan? And it was hot and spicy and crazy, it blew our minds. Absolutely blew our minds, Who knew?
I want to ask you about your writing. And something that I thought of in one of your previous answers was around not necessarily receiving outright advice from your immediate superiors or mentors within the venues you're working within, right? And I'm interested if that was the reason you were attracted to writing and started to publish books and kind of went down that road to teach other people.
It was a little funny beginning here. We had something going on at the Rainbow Room that was pretty unusual. We were sort of in the publishing belt, Random House, everybody was near, buildings near us, Dell. So I had a bunch of editors from Dell, and they're looking at the menu and they're going, man, we've been coming up here a lot now, and you're doing something that no one else is doing here. This should be a book, man. You should be doing a book. And I'm going, yeah, you think so? Wow, never thought about that. So I got all the recipes done already. So why don't you write up some pages of them and hand them to us, and we'll see if we can get this thing going for you. And I thought, yeah, that's a really good idea, man. And I started putting together an outline, and I said, here's all the recipes. They're done already. That's what I worked on for 2 years. And then 6 weeks later, I get a call from the 43rd floor executive office, Joe's office. Get down here. So I go down there. Well, Joe knows everybody. So the CEO of Dell calls Joe up and says, hey, Joe, do you know your head bartender's working with some of our guys over here on a book? Calls me down. He says, what the hell do you think you're doing? And that wasn't the word he used. Number one, we don't own the name Rainbow. Rockefeller Center owns the name Rainbow. We're lessees. Number two, if anybody's going to write a book about this place, it's going to be me. That was the end of my book writing career. Till after Rainbow Room was closed. We lost our lease, as you may or may not know. I'm working at a little, I call it a pop-up now, but it was the old Aurora space. We still owned a long lease on that because Joe had partnered up with a really clever real estate guy. So we had a long lease on that place. And he had retired, but his son was running things now. And the tenant had disappeared in the middle of the night. And he called me up and said, you want to be a partner with me over at the old Aurora space? And I made some stipulations. And while we're running this bar over there, it was a fun place. This is where I first worked with Audrey. I hired her there. It's not where I met her, was first worked with her. I had this guy coming in from Writer's House. He was an agent. And, he knew my story, my backstory. And he said, it's high time for you to write a book. I work at Writer's House and I know this is a book, serious book. I said, yeah, I tried that once before, but I don't know. I said, first of all, I don't have time. I can't go running around to publishers' offices and stuff like that. I'm here 7 days a week, already because I'm the head bartender and, half owner, partner, not owner. But he kept bugging me. And I said, look, isn't there a way they could come to me, And he said, well, actually there is. I couldn't do it there so I went to Waldy Maloof over on 56th Street on the other side of Fifth Avenue. This was Madison Avenue. And I asked Waldy if I could borrow his bar between the lunch and the dinner when it was empty, 3 o'clock. And I said, can I borrow your bar for a couple of days? And, we'll start a check and pay for whatever we use. Audrey was actually his head bartender, and Audrey Saunders, who had Pay Good Club in New York later. And so she was fine with it. And so John Hodgman was his name, my agent. He started bringing in, he's a writer on his own right now and an actor. He's making movies now. He brings people in 5 at a time. And I'm making drinks and tell the stories. We get 3 bits on the book. That's how it started.
Right.
The first draft of the cocktail. Writing it, that's another story. I wasn't a writer, but I wrote the stories like I'm talking to you right now, And I knew the recipes. That was not a problem, And I knew what I wanted as a young bartender. I did pictures of all, you saw them. I cut those little things out. I showed you how to cut this, how to do that. I showed pictures of me shaking, stirring thing and everything. I wanted people to see it. I had never had that as a young bartender. I just got a list of ingredients, And that 2-year process of writing that book, and it was a long process and hard, but it was my voice in the end. And I turned it in and it was returned to me by messenger the next day. And I'm like, God, what have I done? I called my agent. By the way, John had left. His mom died. Now he turned me over to the more senior agent at Writer's House. I said, Susan, I just got the script returned. She said, well, what does it say? They said this. And I read her the letter. Dear Mr. DeGroff, we contracted you for 1 book at 75,000 words. You have delivered 2 books at 135,000 words. You have 2 weeks or you will be in breach of contract to deliver the book that we contracted. And I had a pretty good upfront money, which I had spent already on photography and other stuff like that. And, other stuff. And I was like, we need to get a writer to teach you how to pare down and what you need to get rid of. It's going to be brutal. I said, well, I know a guy. And she said, well, who? And I said, Anthony Giglio. He's a really good writer. I like his writing. She said, he's a magazine guy. I said, well, so what? He's a good writer. I like his style. And anyway, he just has to sound like me anyway and tell my stories. And she said, well, the publisher's not going to be happy. I said, I don't care if they're happy. I said, it's my assets on the line here. So I hired Anthony, and Anthony goes like this. Chapter 3, how theme cocktail parties, that's out. Whole chapter. I'm like, out? The whole chapter? Out. He was brutal. He was just, I had this wonderful chapter, how to throw the Rat Pack cocktail party, how to throw the, was what?
You've still got them saved, I'm sure.
No, I don't know where I was.
All gone.
I was stupid. I didn't save that stuff. Anyway, maybe it's out there somewhere. I can't remember. It could even be at, I don't know where it would be. It was early on. It was 2001, 2000. Any of my computer programs from then won't even run on a new machine. Anyway, we put it together in 2 weeks, and that was the Craft of Cocktail. I ended up winning the IACP award, first book award. My friend Philip Duff, the guy I was talking about before, he had worked at in Amsterdam at the oldest distillery in the world for many, many years as a head of education. It'll supplement mine right now. And he said, great book. Here are the problems. And he listed them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And I loved it that he did that, right? And that was the story of my writing career, but really a lot of it. And then I wrote a book called The Essential Cocktail, in between the two crafts of the cocktails. And they insisted on a ghostwriter. So they hooked me up with a writer. And that book didn't sell because it sounded like him, not me. My wife was reading this and she goes, "Who wrote this? This is not your book." My recipes, a couple of my stories, but it wasn't my book. It was his book. He didn't know how to write in somebody else's voice. Interesting, huh?
That is interesting.
And the book did not sell.
That is interesting because I have heard positive things about ghostwriters as well. So it's interesting to hear, not as positive experience.
Well, in a how-to book, you need to sound like the person who's how-to in it.
That's fair.
And he wasn't a how-to guy when it came to making drinks, and he was a good writer. He's got a couple of novels out now that I have, but it wasn't my voice. And Craft the Cocktail made me a lot of money. And the new one is already in its 5th hardcover edition, and it's making me money. I haven't made a dime on an Essential Cocktail yet. Not a dime. Granted, I had a little larger upfront money, but still, by this time, I should have made money on it. I have.
Dale, I want to thank you so much for joining me today.
It was a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure. I have one final question, and that's who would you like to hear on the show?
I was thinking, because it's Australia, Jason Crowley, he's one of my favorite people in the country.
Yeah, I think we're actually friends on Facebook, but
I
we've
think
not
he would
spoken.
be the most entertaining. He's such a mate, you know what I mean? He would be absolutely wonderful.
Fantastic. Thank you so much again for joining on the program,
My pleasure,
Dale.
James.
Thank you.
This program was produced by H Media. We'll see you soon.